This is episode 5 in my reading of Art, Why I Stuck with a Junkie Jazzman. And the chapter is called The Synanon Game. You could call it group therapy because it took place in a group and usually had a therapeutic effect. You couldn't call it a truth game because everybody lied, or at least exaggerated, in order to get things going. Synanon's original problem with addicts was that they chippied. They managed to get high, and that destroyed the group's integrity. But if an addict could break faith with his backsliding friends, and therefore with his own addiction, and align himself for his soul's sake and the sake of the group with the forces of sobriety, the program would survive. So the game was originally structured to compel people to cop out on their friends. And that was Art's moral problem with it. But the game wouldn't have been as powerful and habit-forming as it was if it hadn't changed over time, becoming more emotionally compelling. While I was there, it explored relationships, personal history, personal habits, obsession, romance, style, intelligence, fantasy. It was profoundly entertaining. It was great fun for those of us who had a lot of words and at least a little wit. It was a celebration of humanity and language. It was suspenseful, tragic, thrilling, hysterically funny, filled with lofty insights and low insults. It was the reason I never got bored in Synanon. A game was played as follows. 8 to 20 people sat in a circle. They were male and female, of mixed ages and of a variety of races. Italians, Puerto Ricans, and Irish from New York. Ex-con junkie wasps like Art from California. Lots of black folk from both coasts. White, artistic, and/or educated fuck-ups like myself. A handful of true crazies who belonged in institutions and who never stayed for long. And younger, burnt-out hippie acid casualties from all over. There were also the actual imported Puerto Ricans and a few Mexicans from LA. And I forgot to mention the drunks. We definitely had a bunch of drunks. There was no leader in a game, but certain participants were already known or simply revealed during the proceedings to be strength, and they'd steer the game a little. Somebody, anybody, would begin by framing an indictment, elaborately phrased and oblique. If you had told me a week ago that I was going to witness the shocking behavior that I saw this morning in the dining room, or simple and direct, Lori, what the hell were you doing yesterday that was so important you couldn't help me out? Sometimes the victim's name and crimes were recited to the group, and the indicter would talk about him as if he wasn't there. Or the indictment was stated while at first the victim's name was withheld for dramatic or comic effect. If you sensed you were the target, your pulse began to race while you mounted a defense and waited for the speaker to turn to you dramatically and thunder out your name. If it wasn't you after all, you'd just received a, quotes, carom shot, an on-purpose ricochet, and probably everybody knew it. Indictments were personal attacks against character flaws, sloppiness, flakiness, bad manners, jealousy, selfishness, obsessiveness, lying, etc. Grooming errors were cited. If the indictment had an element of truth, generally the entire group then climbed aboard, each member chiming in with similar indictments, a theme, and variations. A roommate of mine indicted me for my house cleaning. She said that when I dusted our large mutual dresser, I only dusted my side, leaving a clear demarcation, clean and dirty, on its top. This was true and shaming and the whole group jumped in and nailed me for my habitual exclusivity and selfishness. I shaped up in that regard eventually. So in the game, they told you how they saw you, and they could be mean. Sibling-less, I'd never learned to take that kind of peer abuse. But the game toughened you in time and taught you to define and fight for your unique, ever-changing self, no matter what they said. A friend observed that the game was always more than just the critic and the victim. He said the group mind had the power of a Ouija board to plumb for deeper truths. A good indictment, as in the case of the dusty dresser, was often just an opener, allowing for all kinds of character observations by the group and from the victim personal revelations as justifications or as bids for pity or just because finally, somebody was paying attention to you and you could talk about yourself. And if you did it honestly and the honesty was clear, nobody beyond that point would interrupt you. In fact, you'd get support. Sometimes a game was called for a particular purpose, but usually you just went to scheduled games 3 times a week for the entire population at the same time. So as you sat in your game in the club with your gang of the day, yelling, whining, teasing, taunting, sympathizing, you could hear shrieks of laughter, roaring denunciations, and so on, going on in other games in other rooms. In a game, as opposed to, quotes, on the floor, just about anything was permitted except physical violence or threats of same, which were allowed nowhere in Synanon in those days. In fact, they were grounds for immediate expulsion. In addition, you played regular games with your fellow workers, kitchen workers, office workers, teachers in the school. You could yell at your boss or supervisor. It made for a good workplace, and nobody talked about what went on in the games outside the games. All this only occasionally took on the quality of an ordeal. Usually it was exactly what it was called, a game, and fun. It was fun to talk and get laughs. It was fun to laugh at what were the ultimate inside jokes. And it was more than fun to have your worst and most repellent flaws revealed and then walk out knowing that everyone still loved you anyway, that you were not any more disgusting than anybody else, that you were no longer isolated by your secrets, but known and still included and accepted by the group. And this, to me, was the game's unique and most important function. I felt I'd finally found the party I'd been looking for, with the coolest people in the world, these lunatics, odd ducks, and dope fiends. The game for us, the residents, was the essential tool with which our peers exerted pressure on us to conform to the agreed-on values of the group: sobriety, neatness, honesty, good manners, and responsibility for each other. The game was there to socialize and civilize us. I've been told that this Synanon environment sounds cultish and/or creepy. And much later, long after I left, it did become inarguably cultish and even criminal. But for me, and for most of the wits enders who arrived there yowling on the brink of oblivion, tormented by the rocketing ups and poisonous downs that make up the lives of the heavily medicated, it was a sanctuary. There was sex and love, conflict, and success and failure. And for me, it offered what I'd never had before: instructions for living in the world. And what seemed to be true safety, after all. Art knew if he wanted me, he had to play the game with me. It was part of being known in the community. There were occasional scandals. People sometimes had sex, quotes, under the stairs, sans tribe leader approval. I would never have considered that. Art had been in games with his tribe members twice a week at least for the prescribed 3 months before he had to face me in a game with mine. And he did okay. It was natural for Art to talk about his feelings, almost a compulsion. And he was so truthful when he did that, the women pitied him and men felt they could trust him. We were permitted to get down.